So in note form, yesterday, we used componentWillReceiveProps to do this thing. I was reminded that componentWillReceiveProps has been deprecated. It is considered unsafe. So ideally, we wouldn't use that to achieve this. So we can do this another way. So the whole reason we're doing this is to get the ID from the URL, right? And to make sure that it gets it every time you click on a new one. And to make sure that it does the right thing when you clear it out and all that stuff. Make all those things work. So we did it with componentWillReceiveProps because that's a perfectly sensible way to do this thing, because the change in props is what we're interested in. But it is considered unsafe. So the preferred way to do this kind of stuff is with componentDidUpdate. Happens after an update, componentDidUpdate. And while that receives arguments for, I think it'll have the previous props and the previous state. We're not going to use those arguments, but they are passed in. Since I'm not going to use them, I'm not going to bother putting them in there. So this will run every time the component updates, because either props or state changed. So anytime either one of those changes, this will get called. So we're going to have to do this slightly differently. So get the ID from the URL. We still want to do all the same things. So get the ID from the URL. This time, it's not from new props. It's just from this.props. This.props.match.params.id, because this runs after we've already received the new props. So it's already changed. We can use our safety thing here to set it to an empty string, just to be sure that we don't end up with something null that we tried to do something to. And then we need to compare it to the ID we already have. We're not just going to immediately find the note with that ID, because the thing is, this runs sometimes when the URL hasn't changed. So we want to make sure it's actually changed before we continue. So I'm going to get the old ID as well. So get the previous ID from state. So const old ID. Sorry, I don't want to put capital letters there. Is this.state.note.id or empty string. Oops, I forgot my arrow up here. And then I don't want to, if they're the same, I don't want to do anything else. So continue only if they're different. So if new ID not equal to old ID dot to string. Then we want to do this, find the note with that ID. So we'll do something very much like this. So it's not new props anymore, right? It's actually this.props. So we'll look through this.props.notes. Looking for something with an ID that is equal to new ID. We'll set note to that, or to a blank one. Then we want to update state with that note. So we're going to say this.setState note. This will immediately create an issue. So it's going to call this over and over. As we can see. So we don't need componentWillReceiveProps anymore. We're using componentDidUpdate instead. So let's see what happens if we do this. Maximum update depth exceeded. This can happen when a component repeatedly calls setState inside componentDidUpdate. So we created an infinite loop here. So it stops you, thankfully, instead of actually like bringing your computer to its knees. So every time you update state, that calls componentDidUpdate again. And it's going to keep comparing them. And setState is asynchronous. So it doesn't immediately finish. It runs in the background. And we don't immediately get this list of notes. We have to wait for Firebase to give them back to us. So if this happens absolutely immediately, we won't have loaded the note yet, and note is going to keep being blank note, which isn't any different from, yeah. So anyway, it's just going to keep doing this over and over and over the way we have it written right now. So even though we're already checking if new ID is equal to the ID from state, before we actually update state with the new note, let's make sure that the note has actually changed. So if note.id not double equal to this.state.note.id. And only then will we actually update state with it. Pick a note, refresh the page, it loads. Like, see, the notes aren't there right when the page first loads, right? So if we're already checking this over and over, we're setting state over and over and over, which calls componentDidUpdate every time again. It keeps comparing the ID from the URL to no ID at all, and thus keeps running our if block. So we want to make sure we don't call set state over and over, triggering this thing to run again. So when we actually get the notes, when the array actually loads, that will send new props down. So that will run componentDidUpdate again, and that time it'll work. So it's still probably running it at least twice before it works. We can still switch to a blank one. We refresh the page when it's blank. Everything's still fine. So this works just like it did before, but now we use componentDidUpdate instead of componentWillReceiveProps because that's what we're supposed to do. So use componentDidUpdate rather than componentWillReceiveProps.